This is such a simple question, one that has, I think, multiple great answers, but it's also an interesting study and an interesting conversation. What in the heck happened to the popularity of baseball cards? Because I think we can all agree that trading cards in general, but baseball specifically, it was a big thing for a majority of the past century, right? Most decades of the 1900s, baseball cards and trading them, they were part of society. But those cards don't have anywhere near the impact these days that they once did. In fact, you go back and look at sports card revenue. The business, it was worth about $1.2 billion back in 1991. A lot of people look back and say that was the peak. In fact, back then, you may recall that there were card shows at convention centers and card shops in local neighborhoods. Everybody was trading these cards, not just kids, but adults as well. There were multiple brands back then: Fleer, Topps, Donruss, Upper Deck. But you fast forward to right now, and you wonder how many of the actual Major League Baseball players on the field even have an idea of how popular baseball cards were back in the 80s and 90s, because they weren't even really around back then to understand this. How many current baseball players know about the, 86 Canseco Donruss card? Or how about the Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck rookie card? Some might. I would venture to think most don't. So what happened? Basically, this is easy to understand. Demand, it declined. So then supply also declined. And then business declined, right? Supply and demand both down simultaneously. But why exactly did this happen? I put a poll out recently on Twitter to hear your perspective, saying, why did baseball cards lose so much popularity in the last 30 years? 23% of respondents said that the product never evolved. What I meant by that is that baseball cards were always such a simple thing. They never brought anything new to the table. They remained a piece of cardboard with a picture printed on one side and stats on the other side and a name on the front, and that was pretty much it. So 23%, I think, have a good reason in their answer right there. 56% said there is a generational gap. Now, I'll dive into more on this in just a second, but quite clearly what appeased kids of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, just for whatever reason, doesn't do the same for kids of the 2000s, 2010s, and on into the 2020s. 7%, of course, now this was on Twitter, so it might be a younger demographic. 7% said they were popular? ? And 14% gave me other responses. And of those other responses, there were some great, interesting theories. A lot of people felt like the MLB strike of 1994 did damage to the entire baseball industry, including trading cards, right? And that would correlate. If the peak of them was in 91 and everything went downhill after that, certainly not playing a World Series in 1994 could have been a part of it. Also, the emergence of video games. Kids were less interested in trading cards and talking about players. They actually wanted to be hands-on, at least with a controller, and playing video games, baseball included, instead of playing with trading cards. Another common response was the system of valuation and grading baseball cards. To explain, if you're not familiar, that you need to have a certain condition of your card, right? If it's a mint condition card, you need the proof by a company that does grading of cards, and that costs money. So to go through an entire collection and just say, I have this card, it's worth something, well, it's not really worth it unless it gets graded and valued. And again, you're just having to pay more to prove what you already have before you would trade it or get money out of it. So some people said that was an issue. Also, maybe the popularity of baseball cards should never have been that great in the first place. Again, I go back to the simplicity of what is a baseball card. It's literally a piece of cardboard, kind of like a business card. Photo on one side, cool graphics on the front, some stats on the back side, usually in black and white or monotone colors. I mean, it is still amazing when you think about some cards, some rare ones, some that are in great condition from 100 years ago. Some of them can even still draw more than $1 million. We're talking about $1 million for a piece of cardboard. I realize it's a piece of history and it's been preserved to perfection, but we're talking about Honus Wagner's face on a printed piece of cardboard from so many years ago. It's not even a good replication of his face. Anyway, just going back to that generational gap thing, maybe it's a statement about lack of attention spans in 2019 and recent years. And look, stats would be a fun part of a baseball card because you could look at it and understand who a player was, what other teams they were a part of, where they're from. And obviously nowadays there's a computer and that information is up to date at your fingertips. Why look at last season and the 4 prior to that on the back of an outdated card when I can just get instant information and I can get great pictures of players from tonight's game right on a screen? So I do understand that. How about card companies? And I talked about evolution before, the failure to evolve the baseball card. Now, I will say, over the years, I've seen some pretty cool things. Weren't they taking shavings of actual game-used bats and jerseys and embedding them into trading cards? I think that's an awesome idea. And if that didn't catch on, I mean, I don't know how much more you can do to a trading card to try and make it cool and desirable. So I don't really know if they haven't ever evolved, but I'd like to see them push more stuff like that instead of completely sticking to tradition. Also, don't you think it's kind of sad that, nothing ever replaced baseball cards? I mean, it's not like we're talking about, how the cassette replaced the 8-track and the CD replaced the cassette and the iPod replaced the CD. It's not like that. Nothing replaced the baseball card. There's no successor here. There's nothing newer and better. There's just nothing. So, in a way, that is kind of unfortunate. I also saw some comments and complaints that maybe trading cards and collecting them was too expensive for young kids. But, back in the day when a $1 pack was a big deal, 80s and 90s, okay, Upper Deck, by the way, I think was the first to have $1 packs. Maybe I could understand that back then. But I don't think a $1 pack, which pretty sure you can still get, I don't think that's asking too much in today's world. Because, I mean, how many elementary school kids are out there with iPhones? So if you have the ways and means to own an iPhone, I'm pretty sure you can get your hands on $5 worth of baseball cards to have a good time with, I think. In closing, I mean, it's pretty obvious that baseball cards and their decline are truly a simple sign of the times. The game itself is not what it used to be, but I don't want to scare you. It's not like baseball can't ever get back to that high level of popularity again. And it's just about cards that it was a way for young people and interested fans to better learn the players and their stats and what teams looked like if you ever put all the cards together from a particular team. It was just a way to help create baseball culture that kind of doesn't exist anymore, and that is really where I'm going to leave this video. Baseball needs to figure out what that next thing is. It needs to figure out what is the successor to baseball cards.